GrandMaster Magnus Carlsen, playing as white, versus GrandMaster Vladimir Fedoseev, playing as black. Chess Olympiad 2024, Round 9. GrandMaster Vladimir Fedoseev's win with the black pieces against GrandMaster Magnus Carlsen, and Slovenia defeated Norway 3-1. A shocking defeat for the world's #1 and a deserved victory for Fedoseev, of the greatest fighters in the chess world. Magnus opens the game with 1d4. And let's see what Fedoseev comes up with now. Fedoseev has been in his prime a player about 27-50, so a very strong player. Right now his elo is 2692. He plays his pawn to d5. And now Magnus brings his knight out to f3. And the normal move would be knight f6, when I think Magnus would love to play the London system. So Fedoseev goes for slightly something more active and plays the move c5, immediately challenging Magnus's center. Now you can play e3. Magnus goes for c4. Now this is very complex disposition. Black can play e6, take it into Tarrasch territory. He can even take cd4. He takes here on d4. And now an important moment, because you can take back with the queen, or you can take back with the knight. But Magnus takes cd5 here. Interesting move, because if you take here, then I can play knight c3 and then pick up the pawn on d4. So he plays knight to f6, symmetrical. And Carlsen now snatches the pawn on d4. Think knight takes d5 seems to be a natural move. Yes, takes on d5. And now, how will Magnus continue? One idea is to kick the knight away with pawn to e4. One idea could also be to play g3, bishop g2, put the bishop on this long diagonal. He plays e4, the most natural move. And the knight has to decide whether it wants to go to b6, f6, b4, c7. All these options exist. He goes knight f6, attacking the pawn here on e4. Now for Magnus, it's a decision-making moment. His e4 pawn is hanging. He gives a check here. Think this is a nuance which Magnus could be aware of, although judging from his clock, he's already taken a lot of time, so maybe he's just innovating on the board. And now, bishop takes d7 is one possible move to take the bishop, but Magnus develops his piece. Knight comes out to c3. You can't take here on b5, but he plays e5 right in the center of the board, attacking the knight on d4. And knight f5, but he takes. First, bishop takes d7. If you take with the knight, then knight f5 with the idea of knight d6 is pretty strong. So I think taking with the queen is kind of a must. So he takes here. You can see both the players making their moves pretty slowly, calmly. And now, Magnus can play knight c2, but he goes knight f5, and he's down to 49 minutes on the clock. Fedoseev has 1 hour 15 minutes, so he's clearly handling the time better. And now Magnus is going to lose his castling rights, because takes, and you don't want to be taking with the knight, because then you lose the pawn on e4. So you want to be taking it with the king. King takes d1. And now, this knight on f5 is well placed, but can be kicked away with g6. For the time being, Vladimir just brings his knight out to c6. He wants to simply long castle and use this to give a check. Bishop comes to g5. King Magnus understands such queenless positions the best in the world. He because he knows where the weaknesses are. He understands them very well, and Fedoseev goes for active play. He jumps with his knight to g4. And Magnus brings his king to e2. Now, you can go for a check, but there's a knight here. So if you kick the knight away, I'm going to kick first your knight away with h3. It plays f6, pushing the bishop away from here. Let's see where Magnus takes his bishop. He can come down to d2, but bishop h4 makes a lot of sense here. Black can long castle, but yes, he did, or no, he didn't. He played h5. The main problem with long castles here is that after f3 your knight is weirdly positioned. So h5 is trying to solve this problem, so thereafter f3. You go back, and if he takes, you don't spoil your structure, you can take it back with the rook. That was Fedoseev's idea with h5. So knight h6 played, and Magnus retreats back with his bishop to f2 now. With the knight being traded, he uses his bishop to control the d4 square. Takes. Pawn takes. The advantage that Magnus now has is that he has a very nice fixed square for his knight on e4. It's a beautiful square there. Black long castles. And now there is rook d1, which can be brought in just to the center of the board, and Magnus instantly plays it. Rook h d1 on the board. Wow, interesting position building up. A natural idea now is to develop your bishop to b4, but Fedoseev does not like it. He trades rooks here. Rook takes d1. And rook takes d1. Taken. And pushes the pawn to h4, just creating some cramped space here on the king side. King d3 played by white. What is Magnus doing with his king? Is he trying to get his king? Rook h5 played by Fedoseev. He's challenging Magnus by attacking the pawn on f5, and Magnus is coming up. Wow, what a creative game this is. Fedoseev was trying to activate his rook along the rank, and then Magnus bringing his king to defend the pawn. Rook g5, attacking the pawn on g2. A good idea could be g4, and after take, this is a fine position for white. But Magnus goes rook g1. He doesn't want to go g4. He says, now we are losing your h4 pawn. What are you going to do about it, Vladimir? g6 is what I'm going to do, says Fedoseev. And now, if f takes g6, then f5 check. The king is pushed back. So, Magnus now takes the pawn on h4, attacking the rook. If rook f5 here, this is not great because of knight d5. So he takes with the pawn, check to the king. Magnus moves in king b5. The king is on a walk here. Unbelievable position. He goes rook g6, and is Magnus going to go in even further with king e6 to f7? Wow, that would be something. That would be really something. Or he goes in, but now there's a check. And guys, look at this draw. King f7, check. King f8, check. King e8, knight c7, and it's a draw. But Magnus could, of course, avoid the draw by going to e8 here in sin lines, but he goes bishop c5. Magnus now saves his rook with rook h1 because the rook was hanging. Now the g2 pawn is attacked. But then the f6 pawn will fall. It's a crazy game. Magnus is using his king so well. There's a check to the king now. But king f7, I'm sure that Magnus will know he comes back. But why? What was the need to come back? Well, he wants to attack the bishop here. He wants to gain that crucial tempo. b6 player. But now this king can get really into trouble. Magnus pushes f4. Maybe not the best move here. King d7 played. Wow. Now Magnus must take fe, and king e5 give up the g2 pawn, but instead goes g4 and completely misses black's idea. Knight c2 with the idea to mate. And if g5, f5, rook g4 is winning, but Fedoseev also misses it. He takes fg4, knight c2 was totally winning there. But fg4, Magnus now takes on e5. The reason why Magnus played g4 was to avoid the rook from coming to the 7th rank, fe. And now you can take king e5, but then there is knight f3 check and you lose the bishop. So knight e4 is played by Magnus. He's a pawn down here. Fedoseev gives it. Doesn't do a check, he pleases knight, defends the pawn, attacks the bishop. Bishop can drop back here. The first knight c5 with a check. B takes e5. Well, it's clear that Magnus is won on the defensive yard. His king journey right into the heart of his opponent's position did not work out so well, but it's still within the realms of draw, and after rook d6 check, I think white can just play king takes c5 here. King takes c5, and we are heading towards equality, I believe. Rook d2 is what Fedoseev's plan should be. He thinks for a bit and plays it. Now, Magnus cannot go defensive with rook b1, because then king e6, and the e-pawn is very strong. So he must do something active with b4. He goes rook c1, and this is a mistake. This is a big mistake, because now king e6, a fantastic move, and all of a sudden, black is the one who's totally winning now. h2 is hanging. Rook c4, Magnus goes after the g4 pawn, but there is king f5. This is the point behind king e6. You want to keep your g and e pawns. You're ready to give up your a pawn, and you want to win the h2 pawn. Rook a4 played. Now if you take on b2, then rook a7, the position is still even, but Fedoseev is no one that you can mess with. He takes on h2, and now many ideas in the position, like knight f3 and rook g2 to trap this bishop completely. So Magnus takes the knight, bishop h2. Just a small pause, and now chops off the bishop. This pawn is running down the board. Magnus takes the pawn on e7. Will Fedoseev take the pawn on b2? That seems like a fine pawn to grab. He can also start pushing his g-pawn. This is big trouble for Norway, because they're already down in the match, and Magnus has to win in order to save his team. Rook takes b2 taken. And he plays a4. Here's a check. King goes to b5. It's time to push the g-pawn. g3 player, and these two pawns are just too strong, because you can go king f4, e4, e3. Put the rook behind the pawn. As it rook comes to g7, then you go just king g5, king f4. One of the rare occasions that Magnus Carlsen gets out of it there in a complex queen-less middle game. I think Fedoseev played some tremendous chess there. Out with him, you can see the crowd gathering around the board, because Magnus losing is just very, very rare. Check here. King comes to c6, and he attacks the a2 pawn, so the rook will take care of the a pawn, and the other two pawns will start running down the board. Magnus brings his king to p6. I think it's time for e4. The other pawn has to advance. Yes, e4 is on the board. e6. From Magnus's expressions you can often know the result of his game. He's not at all happy there. Meanwhile, Norway is 1-2 down in the match. They are trailing by a point. So if Magnus would have won, they could have drawn the match. But right now Magnus is lost, so Slovenia is going to score a big victory here. It gives a check. It's like you have to do it step by step. For example, he has king e4. Check. And now king f3. Yes, king f3. And if you give another check, I'm going to go king g2. So that there are no checks now. And if you attack the e-pawn, I'll just push it to e2, and then bring my king over to Dryanqui. So Magnus Inshravrukisan plays a7. He wants to put his pawn here. Fedoseev pushes his pawn to e2. The pawn needs to be stopped now. So, rook e7. King comes to f2. And now the checks will begin. But you know where the checks will end? The checks will end when the black king comes on the same file as the white king, because then the rook will have no way to check here. The white king himself will come in the way. So that's the winning plan. Check. King d2. Gives another check. And now he was king c1. Very good. Because now if you play a rook e1, then I have g2. He was another check. And Fedoseev knows that he is winning here. Simply king b1 should end the game. King b1 played. And Magnus resigns. Thank you for watching the video. Please like, share, and subscribe.